People often misunderstand the anxious ones. They look fragile, overly emotional, too sensitive, as if they were children begging for reassurance in every relationship. But what if I told you, those who seem the weakest can become the strongest force in the entire emotional pattern? Because when an anxious person finally turns inward and chooses to face themselves with brutal honesty, they become the one thing an avoidant person fears the most. Someone who no longer chases. First, the misunderstood anxious type. We assume anxious people are clingy and needy, always alert, always scanning the room, always terrified of losing the person they love. But their pain does not come from weakness. It comes from proximity. They feel emotions too closely. They sense every shift in tone, every pause in a message, every subtle change in distance. The way a thin-skinned person can feel even the temperature in the air. This sensitivity is not a flaw. It is an ability, just one that has been misused, directed outward toward self-punishment, and toward trying to interpret someone else's every move. Second, what being harsh to yourself really means. Being harsh on yourself is not about suppression. It is not about pretending not to care. It is not self-denial. It is doing the hardest thing an anxious person can ever do, turning the spotlight inward. Not asking, do they still love me? But asking, why am I so afraid of not being loved? This shift is like asking a fish to notice the water. It requires stepping out of a lifelong emotional pattern, a pattern where their worth was measured entirely through the reactions of others. Cutting off that feedback system feels like learning to breathe all over again. But some people manage to do it. And when they do, they enter a new kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of abandonment, but the loneliness of emotional independence. A loneliness chosen, not inflicted. For the first time, they see that avoidance is not rejection, but simply the avoidant person's way of navigating closeness. And none of it ever proved whether the anxious person was lovable or not. Third, when the anxious person stops chasing. This is the plot twist of the entire story. Avoidants live on one rule. You come closer, I step back. It is a dance their dance, one they have led for years. But what happens when the music changes? When the anxious person suddenly says, I need time for myself. Let us stop talking for a while. I need to handle my emotions first. For an avoidant, these words are a nuclear shock, because the person they believed would always reach out no longer reaches. The hand that always extended slowly retracts. And for the first time, it is the avoidant who panics. Fourth, rebuilding the core self. This transformation is not manipulation. It is not a tactic. It is not a strategy to lure someone back. An anxious person who truly changes does not have the energy to play games. They are too busy rebuilding the foundation they should have had all along. Reclaiming emotional independence feels like detoxing. It hurts. It shakes everything loose. It forces them to confront old wounds and outdated beliefs about love and worth. But after the storm, a new form of strength rises. They remain sensitive, yes. They still feel deeply, but their sensitivity becomes a compass, not a weapon against themselves. They can detect emotional tension without dissolving into fear. They can sense distance without collapsing into despair. Fifth, the real power shift. Most people misunderstand strength. They think the one who needs less wins. They think independence equals control. But real power comes from having the freedom to choose. A rebuilt anxious person can say, I do not need you to complete me. I choose to love you. And that makes all the difference. To an avoidant, this is the deepest disruption possible, because suddenly they are facing someone who is whole, someone who does not shatter just because there is space between them, someone who can stay connected without losing themselves. This challenges the avoidant soldier's belief that closeness is dangerous. Sixth, beyond being a nemesis. People say the anxious type becomes the avoidant's weakness, but the truth is more profound than that. When the anxious person reforms their inner world, they do not just change the dynamic, they transform the very structure of how they love, how they relate, and how they exist. It is not about overpowering someone else. It is about rising into a higher version of themselves. Only two complete people can build a healthy relationship. Not a pursuer and an escaper, not a pleaser and a distancer, but two individuals who can stand side by side without losing themselves. Seventh, if you are in this storm right now, your sensitivity is not a flaw. Your longing for connection is not a burden. Your deep emotional awareness is not something to suppress. These are not weaknesses. They are raw, unshaped power. Turning inward will hurt. It will feel like emptiness at first, because the space that used to be filled with someone else's emotions finally belongs to you again. It is not a void. It is a room waiting for you to move back in. And when you no longer need to be anyone's nemesis, you will discover the real strength that has been inside you all along. A strength meant not to conquer others, but to anchor yourself. And strangely enough, that is often the moment when the love you have been chasing finally walks toward you on its own.